A couple of summers ago, I was having serious problems with my car, and on top of that, I was going through a lot of personal problems. My boyfriend and I had just broken up, my savings were depleted, and there was a lot of drama at my job. In the midst of all this chaos, my car began to behave strangely. It was shaking when I started. Smoke was blowing from the exhaust, the dashboard was throwing out codes, and check engine lights were coming on. Everything that could go wrong seemed to be happening at once. The problem is that I know absolutely nothing about cars. You could say it's because I'm a girl, but even if I were a boy, I probably wouldn't know anything either. I'm not interested in cars or understanding them. I'm more than happy to pay someone to do that job. At the time, newly independent, I had very little money available. So when the car started shaking and making strange noises, I was immediately worried. If it was something serious, I'd be left without a car because I couldn't afford it. One of my friends suggested that I find a local mechanic online to make a simple diagnosis, locate the problem, and maybe find a more affordable solution depending on the cost. My friend had recently needed some repairs and turned to a guy who advertised on Facebook. Not only did he fix everything that was wrong with his car, but he was completely transparent about the costs. However, this guy was so busy that he wouldn't be able to help me for at least 3 weeks, or even longer. My car got worse every time I started it, so I started looking for someone else online. I started with Craigslist, but quickly discovered that I didn't like how anonymous it was. I put up an ad and got dozens of responses in one day, but none had to do with fixing my car. Most of it was just unsolicited photos and offers for dates and other weird stuff. I removed the ad in less than 24 hours and then ventured into the world of Facebook Marketplace. This seemed to be much safer from the start. People could see my ad, see what I was looking for, and the people who responded also had a name and a face. I recognized half of those who commented from somewhere in the city. They said they would be on the lookout to find me an affordable mechanic. By Friday, I got a message from a guy named Javier. This guy seemed pretty legit. His profile was a few years old. It wasn't filled with sexualized posts or political propaganda. He seemed normal, and his account had a long history of working as a mechanic with lots of pictures of him working on cars in garages, wearing overalls in the shop, that sort of thing. Javier seemed legit from top to bottom, and given my situation, he was all I was really looking for. Through direct messages, I learned that Javier was starting his own business and was doing all his work on his own. I had worked for a major dealership in town, then a couple of shops, and was fully insured and certified. This was music to my ears, exactly what I wanted to hear. Javier said he had a job he was finishing and I would be next on the list. We exchanged phone numbers and I started saving as much money as I could. I was anxious, but things were finally looking up. I didn't really know what to expect cost-wise, but I knew this was the best option and the one I could probably afford. I stopped worrying and tried to focus on the things I could really control, like my mood and my performance at work. I saved up a little extra money, had a couple of good nights of fun, and relaxed. Things were going well, and if I allowed myself, they could get better. Surely I got a call a whole day earlier than expected. Javier was ready for me. He was done with his last customer, the repair was easier than he had initially diagnosed, and the car was back on the road. More music to my ears. I was starting to let go of all my problems, until something didn't quite fit. Unless you have something in writing, or better yet, see the work with your own eyes, never take anyone at their word. That's how all these marketplace sites work, and they can cause you a big headache. We exchanged information and I gave him all the details of my car, the year, make, model, and symptoms of the problems I was having. He gave me the address of his garage and the time I was supposed to arrive. It all felt professional for a guy I found online, so I was even more excited to get this over with. I thanked Javier for his time and told him I would see him tomorrow. The address he gave me was half an hour away on a side of town I didn't know very well. He told me to be there at 10 a.m. and didn't want to be late, so I planned to leave at 9. That never happened because I woke up to my phone ringing around 5 a.m. It was Javier. He said his day had been disorganized because he had an appointment later that day that he had forgotten about and didn't want to leave me hanging. He asked if there was any way he could bring the car to him now, to at least take a look. I wasn't working that day. I was already awake and I needed this to happen now. I told him I'd be there as soon as possible. He sounded very excited. He said goodbye and I started to prepare. I showered quickly, got dressed and ate a microwave breakfast, then hit the road. I don't even think the sun had risen yet. I drove quietly until I reached a point where I didn't know the streets anymore. It wasn't until I passed the last traffic light that I realized I was no longer in the neighborhood. There were still houses lying around, but there were big, empty, grassy lots between them. Despite the decline of civilization around me, I didn't think twice about it. At some point, I reached out to grab my phone, check my messages, and change the song that was playing on my speakers. The second I picked it up, I got an incoming call from Javier, so I answered it right away. I prepared to say hello when I could hear Javier talking to someone else. It sounded strange. It was his voice, but he spoke in a totally different way. Neither professional nor street, if you know what I mean. "She'll be here soon," he explained to someone who sounded just as weird. "Shh, I'm calling her," he said, and they both fell silent. "Hello," I said into the phone. "Carla," Javier replied in his normal voice. "Yes, is everything okay?" I asked. "Yes, I just wanted to make sure you didn't have trouble finding the place. I know he's a little out of the way," he said. "Don't worry, I'm on my way. I think I'm 15 minutes away," I replied. "Do you have another mechanic with you today?" I asked. He stammered a little and said, No. Why?" "I thought I overheard you talking to someone when I answered," I explained. "It must have been the radio or something," he said. "I just wanted to make sure you weren't lost. How far away are you?" "The map says it's not too far from the main road. You see, the address I gave you is just for the entrance. You'll have to drive about 800 meters to get to the workshop," he explained. I started to get a little nervous. He didn't mention that he was in the middle of nowhere or that he would have to drive off-road. My car was already having problems, and driving down a country road was the best way to make them worse. Still, he had come this far. I was still hoping that Javier would be the one to help me and fix my car. He could sense the apprehension in my voice and said all the things I wanted to hear. How he would check the engine and make sure everything was in order, which encouraged me and got me on the road again. I said goodbye and hung up the phone. I had caught him lying, a skill I had developed during my breakup that summer. He fell into the trap and couldn't understand why. Who was with him that he didn't want me to know? The road appeared and I turned into what was a large dusty space on the side of the road. From there, it was a dirt road that wound its way into the forest. My stomach sank almost immediately. Clearly, this was not a path that led to a residence or business of any kind. Maybe there were camps out there, and if not, piles of road trash and shooting targets. I drove my car down the road, and then down the dirt road, trudging forward for about 5 minutes before stopping. Despite the growing dawn, there was nothing there. There were no lights in the distance, no big warehouse, no workshop doors, nothing. I grabbed my phone and called Javier. "Hello," he said. "Hello, I don't see anything around here. Not at all." "How far did you say I was?" I asked, knowing that I had already said I was about 800 meters from the main road. "Oh, about 800 meters. Well, I've come so far already. I've been driving for a few minutes now," I interrupted him. "Oh, well, you're almost there. I'm not good at calculating distances. Maybe it's more than 800 meters, maybe 3 kilometers, but no more than that," he explained. My stomach kept twisting. Things didn't add up, and I felt silly for being in the woods at 5 in the morning. Incredibly, I kept going, pressing the gas pedal and daring my car to break down at any moment. I went a little further when my phone lit up with another call from Javier. I responded and slowed down. "Hi, I can see your headlights," he exclaimed. I felt a little confident for a second, but then I remembered the keywords he had used to bring me here. I realized that this guy must be a con artist and very good at it. Every time he expressed any doubts, he would start saying all the positive things he needed to hear, and I would just believe him. "Yes, go ahead, go through this tree line and you'll be here." "Why is your workshop here?" I asked him directly. "Oh, you know," he began. "There's no workshop, is there?" I asked in a measured tone, trying to gauge how many of his words were lies. Then he did something unexpected. He hung up on me. I stared at the phone in disbelief, snorted, and then froze. Shadows flickered in front of my headlights. I looked slowly, and to my horror, 2, maybe 3 people were approaching me through the tall grass. I screamed and hit the lock button, which was a relief. But I really needed to get out of there. I was panicking and wasting time. I grabbed the shifter and put it in reverse, but nothing happened. I could feel that nothing was happening on the broadcast or anywhere. When I accelerated, the car was still moving forward. It wasn't good. I switched to reverse and it fixed. Then shifted back to reverse and nothing. I switched to forward gear and still nothing. My eyes slowly opened as I realized I was stuck in neutral. Car problems were about to get me killed. I kept fiddling with the lever and pedal, but nothing worked. The engine roared, but one of the gauges simply spun in circles. Everything else was completely still, except for those figures beyond the windshield. There were definitely 3 of them, and they were deployed, approaching at an unhealthy pace. I felt bile rising in my throat from the anxiety and despair that drove me there, and tears began to cloud my vision. I knew the car was my only hope. I kept fiddling with the lever until it clicked. The car reversed, and I suddenly backed up the road I had traveled. That dirt road was uneven, but for the most part it was a straight line. I didn't even bother to use the mirror at first. I just started backing up as fast as the car would let me. I felt like I hit the bumper here and there, but it was a small price to pay compared to what those guys had planned for me. "Hey, come back, let's fix you!" I heard someone yelling over the noise of the engine. "Come on, you were so close," another voice shouted, and then nothing. I backed up to the main road, shifted into forward gear, and sped into town. Thankfully, the car was running better than ever, as if that off-road session had corrected some of its own problems. In any case, I was thanking God that I didn't get caught up in whatever was going on in those woods. It didn't occur to me until I got back to town that I should probably call the police. I looked at my messages and, of course, Javier had blocked me. I assumed he did the same thing with the phone, which was probably just a disposable. Thankfully, I got home without incident and wanted to just go back to bed and sleep, to forget everything. But I was so upset by that experience that I ended up calling the police, and they gave a full report. I didn't follow up or anything, but inside I have the feeling that they found it. I keep going through the police files of people who arrest for various crimes, and I saw Javier's name 1 week. The only time I saw him. The last names didn't match the ones I had before, but the whole Facebook account was a trap, or so I think, to lure girls like me into the woods. And the scariest thing of all is that the guy almost made it. Last year, my laptop broke and I really needed a new one. I searched online and also went to Best Buy, but then I had the idea to search Facebook Marketplace. It looked like it might be the cheapest and quickest option. I didn't need it to be new, and I also didn't want to wait for shipping time when buying a used one online, so I searched Facebook Marketplace for people who were near me. Luckily, I live in a fairly crowded area and was able to find the laptop I wanted at a reasonable price. It wasn't far away, so I contacted the seller and told him I wanted to buy it as soon as possible. The salesman replied a short time later, and told me that I could come to his house. I didn't like this idea. Possibly nothing bad would happen and everything would be fine, but I didn't want to go to a stranger's house. I replied that I preferred to meet in a public place in the area. The man asked why, and I told him I just didn't want to go to the house of someone I didn't know. After a little more conversation through Facebook messages, he finally agreed. He gave me the name of a local restaurant to meet us and said he would be there at 9 p.m. I accepted and then went to withdraw some money. I wasn't very happy that the man wanted to meet at 9:12 p.m., but at least it was a public place. I had never been to the restaurant before, but that night I drove there and it was a small, old place. There was nothing else really close and it was somewhat removed from the other businesses in the area. The parking lot was in the back and I parked, then messaged the seller to let them know I was already there. He replied by telling me to come in. After that, I got out of my car and walked into the restaurant. The place looked quite old and looked more like a bar than a restaurant. I found a small open table, sat down on a stool, and looked around. I couldn't identify the guy. His profile picture on Facebook was not of him, but a logo of a sports team. I looked around to see if there was a guy with a laptop or alone, but I didn't see anyone. I texted him that I was already in there and asked where he was. A couple of minutes passed and I still didn't see him or get back to me. Finally, after about 5 minutes, I received a notification that I had responded. When I read it, he said he was sorry, but he couldn't make it. I was really confused. He'd told me to come in, as if I were there, and now he'd say I wasn't going to make it. I was frustrated and decided to leave. I didn't want to buy him the computer anymore. The guy was too weird. I was sure there were plenty of other good laptops for sale, and that I would have no problem finding another one. So I got up and walked out of the bar. I made my way to my car in the parking lot behind the bar, and then got in. I started driving back home. The bar was about 15 minutes from my house, and when I got back on the roads, they were very quiet. But after I started driving back home, a car pulled out of the bar right behind me. I didn't think much of it at first, but the more I drove, the more I stayed right in my tail. After making several turns, it no longer seemed like a coincidence. It seemed like whoever was driving that car was deliberately following me, especially since it was following me very closely, and if it was faster or slower, it kept the same speed as me. When I was 5 minutes away from my apartment, I started to really get worried, but a part of me was telling me that there was no way this car was really following me, that I was just being paranoid. It was a pickup truck that followed me and was average in size. I could really only see the headlights and couldn't tell who was behind the wheel. Finally, I made it to the turnoff for my apartment. I lived in a fairly large complex with several buildings and a huge parking lot. When I walked in, so did the van. That was my worst fear. I drove through the parking lot but didn't stop. Instead, I drove all the way and then exited the parking lot on the other side. The van also came out with me. At that point, it was pretty much 100% confirmed to me that I was being followed. My adrenaline was pumping, and I was desperate to lose the car, but I still knew it best not to speed or drive recklessly. Instead, I started turning on random streets and in random business and restaurant parking lots. Then I'd go out the other way and get back on the road. It was probably very clear to whoever was behind me that I knew they were following me and that I was trying to lose them. This went on for quite some time, probably about 30 minutes. Soon, however, the gasoline warning light came on, indicating that it needed to charge soon. I was very worried I couldn't go on like this for much longer. The truck was still right in my tail. I kept doing what I was doing, and I could probably continue about 40 kilometers or so. Then, when I made a turn, the truck just went the other way. I couldn't believe it, but it was finally over. I guess he finally gave up. After the van drove away, I went to get gas and then headed back to my apartment. I was very careful the whole time and didn't see the van the rest of the way. After returning home, I realized that the driver of the van was probably the salesman of the laptop. I hadn't really thought about it when I was being followed, but now it all made sense. He told me he was inside the bar to try to get me in. I looked at the ad again, and now it was gone. The user had also blocked me. Whoever it was, I was a little worried because I originally drove up to my apartment complex, but I was just hoping it would think it was the first of all the random places I turned to lose it. Also, I wouldn't know what building I lived in or what unit it was in. Fortunately, I never saw him again. I also haven't used Facebook Marketplace since. I'm one of those people who is always changing my phone. I buy a new one almost every year. For me, it's just a personal preference. Many times I trade in my old phone for a new one, but that's not always the case. A while ago I bought a new iPhone, but I still had the old one, so I decided to sell it on Facebook Marketplace. The phone was still fairly new, and I thought someone would want it. I posted it at a reasonable price, and within a day someone made me an offer. I sold it to him, and after receiving payment, I sent it to the buyer, a man named Joaquin. Everything seemed normal, and it was. Joaquin got the phone, and I thought that would be the end of the story. But about a week later, I received a friend request on Facebook from Joaquin, the buyer of the phone. I didn't know him at all, other than that he had bought me the phone. I clicked on his profile and saw that he lived in the same state, in a city that was an hour or two away. However, when I clicked on his profile, there wasn't much information because we weren't friends. I thought it was a bit weird, so I declined his request. The next day, he sent me a message. He asked me why I had turned down his request and said he really wanted to be friends with me. I replied that I had only sold him the phone. I didn't know him from anything else, and not to take it the wrong way, I just didn't know him. However, he kept messaging me. He called me things I won't repeat here and seemed quite angry. At that point, I blocked it. It was really weird, to say the least, but I thought that would be the end. Joaquin didn't contact me anymore on Facebook or any other social media after that. What he did was much worse. The next night, a few hours after I got home from work, there was a knock on the door. I walked to the front of my house and looked out the window to see what appeared to be Joaquin standing there. I couldn't believe he was actually in my house. I would never have imagined that I would do something like this. When I saw this, I backed away and walked away from the door. He called again. There was no way he was going to open the door. This guy had to be crazy. I heard him scream that he knew he was home from the other side of the door. I'm not sure how he knew. Maybe he heard me walking as I passed by the door. I didn't think he'd seen me when I looked out the window. Still, it wasn't going to open. Instead, I called the police. I told them that a man I had met on Facebook had shown up at my house unannounced and uninvited, and that he wasn't leaving. I was told someone would be there shortly, and the police arrived much faster than I expected. Joaquin basically stayed on my front step. He didn't try to force his way in, but he clearly wasn't leaving. When the police arrived, they talked to him and then to me. They finally managed to get Joaquin to leave and told him that if he returned, he would be arrested. He agreed not to come back and thankfully kept his word. I haven't seen him or been contacted by him since. I still can't believe I did that.